Welcome to the Tyler Dickerhoof Show with me, your host, Tyler Dickerhoof. On today's episode, I'm joined by, at this point, good friend. I mean, friends anyways, but my good friend, Mark Miller. Mark is the co-founder of Lead Every Day, the former vice president of high performance leadership at Chick-fil-A, and the author of 12, 13 books, something like that, around in there, including the international bestseller, The Secret, which now has its 4th edition. And we have the opportunity to talk about this book. We've talked about 2 of his other books before. Mark, so good to be back with you.
It's great to be with you. It's great to be with you today.
Man. So, Mark, let's talk a little bit about why now for this 4th edition of The Secret.
Okay. There are a couple of reasons. One is the publisher approached us and said, hey, the book is still selling, and which is fantastic. And, we're very thankful for that. I mean, the book's been out just over 20 years. And we said, that's good news. And he said, yes. He said, I think it's time for a 4th edition. And I said, really? And he said, if you've got anything new you'd like to say or anything you've learned over the last 20 years, I'll give you that opportunity, because in the publishing world, I have learned that some new editions have new content and some don't. Mm-hmm. And I had already told him years ago, I'm not going to do new editions just as a marketing ploy. And so that's why he approached us and said, have you got anything new? And we actually do, or we did have something new, was my response to him. And he said, well, what have you got? And I don't know how deep you want to go into this right now, but
bring it on.
In the original book, we introduced the concept of the iceberg as the perfect picture of leadership. And we said about 10% is above the waterline and about 90% is below. And we said that in the very first few pages of that original book in order to get permission not to talk about what is below the waterline. We acknowledged it, but we said this book is about what's above the waterline. And so the first 3 editions of The Secret were about the 10%. I wrote a second book called The Heart of Leadership almost 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Talking about what's below the waterline. Well, Chick-fil-A had come to me and said, hey, we've got a problem. And I said, we got a lot of problems. Which one do you want to talk about? By the way, some of your listeners may not know, I spent almost 45 years working at Chick-fil-A on the corporate staff. So I was familiar.
That's where we first met each other now, almost 10 years ago.
Right. So I was familiar with a lot of our problems, and they said, well, we got a problem in the leadership space. They said, because our point of view on leadership is the iceberg. And I said, yes, I remember that. And they said, and you've written 2 books. And I said, right. And they said, the problem is we've got a lot of men and women corporately and in the restaurants who've read one book or the other. So therefore, they have a truncated view of our point of view. And so they said, we want you to write a book and put these together. And so when he came back and said, have you got anything new to say? I said, we'd like to come back and actually change one of the fundamentals to incorporate the heart habits and the character traits that we only referenced in the first 3 editions. And so that's what we did.
When that was a problem for Chick-fil-A, why was it a problem?
Well, again, if you actually embrace the idea that all great leaders and all great leadership is a combination of skills and character, skills and heart, but you've got a book about skills and that's all you're exposed to, the heart stuff, it doesn't make sense. Or vice versa. If you only think leadership is about heart, well, then you're not going to be able to lead because it requires skills. And so it was probably a flawed strategy from the very beginning, in all honesty. But our rationale 25 years ago is what we felt like we had a most pressing need on the skill side, because we had never defined for our leaders what are the things that we expected them to do. And we were selecting for character and selecting based on heart. In fact, a little known story, when Ken and I were working on the book, the publisher said they were excited about it and will release it in 3 years. And I said, why are you going to release it in 3 years? And they said, because Ken's got 4 books ahead of you in the pipe. Well, Ken looked at me and said, I think this book is good enough in its current form. It might serve some leaders, and we could learn some things if we just self-published a batch and gave them away. Mm-hmm. So he and I printed 10,000 copies, as I recall, of the pre-publication copy and started giving them away. Well, in that pre-publication copy, we didn't have the iceberg that I mentioned a moment ago. And so one night I'm at home, the phone rings, my wife answers it, and she said, "It's for you." And I said, "Who is it?" She said, "I don't know." So I took the phone, and this woman said, "Is this Mark Miller?" And I said, "Yes, ma'am, it is." Said, "Did you just write a book with Ken Blanchard?" And I said, "Yes, ma'am, I did." And she said, "I want you to know it's awful." And I said, "Well, thank you for your feedback." I said, "Is there a particular part that you find troubling?" And she said, "You didn't even talk about what's most important in leadership." And I said, "Well, help me know what we missed." She said, "You didn't say anything about the character of a leader." And she said, "That's most important." And I said, "Well, ma'am, I understand that and I believe that, but we select for character." And she said, "Maybe that's how you do it at Chick-fil-A. That's not how the world does it." And she said, "This book is awful if you don't fix this." Well, she didn't even know it was a pre-publication copy. So I go to Ken and go, "Ken, we got to fix this." And so when the first edition came out, we added the iceberg and said, "And we're not going to talk about heart.
Yeah.
We're going to focus on the above the waterline." And so it's been a 25-year issue that we are now trying to rectify.
When in some of the data you guys had releasing this book is, as I read it here, 82% of managers still struggle to lead effectively. I think if you talk to your organization, right, Lead Every Day, you go through the titans, right, that are in the industry, the Maxwells, the Lencioni's, go on and on. I think if we were to sit with them, they would say, yeah, this is not a problem that's going away. And it's partly, gives them runway to continue to sell books and do all the things. But where do you think in taking what you just shared with me, there's one avenue of the book that really talks about the 10%, and then, the heart of leader talks about the other percent. As I hear that from you, I'm like, man, that's the challenge I think we have in our world is really you have these two dichotomous camps that are like leadership is just about loving people no matter what. And then like, nope, it is grinding them and getting them. It's like we don't have the whole picture. And I think that's really the problem. That's how I view it. But man, you tell me.
Well, I think that is a problem. And it is a big problem. I don't want to minimize it. But the problem is organizations aren't training, educating, and developing leaders well at all, regardless of the point of view. Even those that are saying it's all about the skills, what we see most often when we see leadership development in corporations and organizations and businesses, what we see most often are random acts of training. Totally sporadic. Try this, try that. Somebody's got a new book. Let's do a workshop or let's pass them out at a team meeting. And it just doesn't work. It does not work. We actually have been advocating for a long, long time, and this is what we have continued to try to do at Chick-fil-A, is actually create a leadership culture. And the way we define that is a place where leaders are routinely and systematically developed, and you have a surplus. And that freaks people out because we did a global survey just a few years ago while working on this project, and let me think if I can get the numbers and bring them up here. I want to say it was 40% said they don't have enough leaders today. And half the leaders said, we're not going to be able to solve this, which is absurd, right? I mean, that's just absurd. But there's no systematic training, education, development of leaders. That's maybe the biggest problem. And then, of course, if you have a flawed concept, and I don't want to say flawed, many organizations that do have a point of view, it's a point of view destined to suboptimize results. And we talk about that if you think the way to drive results is just to focus on results, you're going to suboptimize results. But the flip side, if you think the way to maximize your performance is just to love people, you're going to suboptimize your results as well.
Yeah.
It's actually one of the fundamentals. The best leaders value results and relationships. There's, as Jim Collins calls it, the genius of the and when you do both.
Yeah.
And so last piece, what I think is maybe, I don't want to say it's the root because there are a lot of issues why leaders don't have, or why organizations don't have enough leaders and why they don't think they can fix it. I mean, there are a lot of issues, but I would say the starting point, and this was reflective of our journey, but I don't think we at Chick-fil-A were unique. 25 years ago, what led to this first edition of this book was we needed more leaders. And I think based on our global survey, a whole lot of organizations understand that and are living in that reality today. Because when you have a problem to solve or an opportunity to seize, you're typically going to put a leader on it. Now, he or she won't single-handedly solve the problem or seize the opportunity. What are they going to do? They're going to put together a team and cobble together the resources and cast the vision. They're going to provide the leadership to solve the problem or seize the opportunity. Well, 25 years ago, almost 30 now, we had problems and opportunities at Chick-fil-A, and we looked at our leadership bench and we said,
Yeah.
it was
We're
not
empty.
good. It was not good. And we had conversations about, I hope this person can lead in the future. I think this person will be ready in a few years. So what do you do in the short term? You either live with the problem, miss the opportunity, or you give those things to existing leaders. And we gave that stuff to existing leaders. But I give full credit to our executive committee. They knew that was a dead end street, right? You'll kill your existing leader. You'll just kill them. And so that's when they asked me to figure out, how do you accelerate leadership development? And I put together a team of really smart people. And we realized that the first thing we had to do was to define it. Everybody in the organization, and I think this might be true around the world, when you say leadership and leadership is good and leadership is important and leadership is valued, everybody's going to nod their head. If you want to try something, pass out a 3x5 card and ask everybody to write down their definition of leadership and take them up and read them. And unless you've done the hard work to forge a consensus, they're all going to be different. And what we discovered 25 years ago, and what I have found in countless organizations since, they can't accelerate leadership development because they've never agreed on what their leaders are supposed to do. And so that's what led to the 5 fundamentals. Our team, we said the first thing we got to do is we've got to get agreement on what we want our leaders to do. And that became the secret.
As we're kind of tearing bits and pieces of this piece of sandwich apart, is what a leader needs to do as important to define as what they should not be doing. Let me give you context. Like, one of the things that I see going on so much as I interact, as I talk to people, is this process of leadership enhancement, development, promotion is, hey, keep doing what you were doing and now help other people around you do it too. And what I find is that causes such a problem because they're trying to lead, they're trying to motivate a team, cast a vision, do all those things, but then they're still responsible to do the job as a part of the team that they were still doing. And I see that so destructive because you can't lead a team that, quote unquote, in that case, a lot of times you're competing with. And I think that's been the short-term fix of, we haven't developed the leader. We can't put more on the senior leader. So we'll just kind of, pardon my French, half-ass this and just thinking that it'll be good enough and they'll figure it out over time. And then all of a sudden it works out. And so I think we're in this place where, as you mentioned, we need to define what a leader should be doing. I think there's some inventory that people need to be saying is like, hey, there's some things leaders should no longer be doing.
Sure. Yeah. All right. So I got a couple of thoughts. Fantastic question. Part of the answer is to have clarity on what you're saying yes to and allowing that to have priority. Now, it's not as easy as that, but literally some of the fundamentals that we may talk about here before we're done, leaders don't even know they're supposed to do those things.
Why don't we just jump into that right now? Go ahead and share those for the audience. Yeah.
To lesser things because they don't understand that they're sacrificing something that's actually more important. And let me say one more thing, and then we'll jump into the fundamentals. We've seen a pattern, and there's no judgment in this pattern, but I think it gets to what you're talking about. Many leaders, I would even suggest the majority of leaders are asked to move into leadership because they're good at doing something. And so when they assume the role and the responsibility, they do so with the bias of a doer. And most leaders begin their leadership journey trying to do things and often to do too much. Now, at some point, the leaders that survive, they advance in their thinking and their methods, and they discover delegation. And it's like the heavens have opened. They realize that other people can actually do stuff, and it's freeing and it's liberating. Here's the trick and the challenge. A lot of leaders get stuck there because there are other places that you can progress to. Because if you're my leader and you're delegating to me, then your involvement and presence is required for me to have purpose and direction on an ongoing basis. I was actually with a Chick-fil-A operator one time, and he acted like he was very distracted, and I'm trying to figure out what it is that's got him kind of distracted, because I've been in the restaurant a few times myself, and I think I see what it is that is distracted him. And he finally said, excuse me. And he went and he came right back and he said, okay, I'm good now. And I said, well, tell me what just happened. He said, I had to tell somebody to go pick up that trash in the parking lot. And I said, okay, so I have one question for you. Who tells them to pick up the trash when you're not here? He was stuck in the delegation mode. I literally was in a Chick-fil-A restaurant this week, and there was some trash, and there was a lot of trash, and I was just moving along. So I wanted to stop and pick it up. So I saw a team member, and I said, hey, when you get a minute, you need to address this. And he said, I hope my leader will tell somebody to pick that up. So I'm thinking somebody's there is in a delegation mode. What happens when you're in that world, then people wait to be delegated to.
This is going to be a tangent.
You don't want to get stuck.
Wait. Can we camp out? We'll come to the fundamentals. I know we'll get there. Can we camp out? Why do you think leaders get stuck in delegation?
Well, I think part of it is there's a knowledge gap. I think about myself growing up as a leader. There were many times when I learned something and I didn't know what I didn't know.
Yeah.
Like if I was a doer and I get all this capacity gifted to me when I discover delegation, unless somebody's telling me, oh, there's another step, there are a couple of more steps you can take as a leader, I may think this is what leadership is. It's back to, if you don't have an agreed upon valid and complete definition, then you'll do what is right in your own eyes and your own experience. So to those leaders that are stuck delegating, I'm going to say the next step on the journey is when you become a developer. And then you help other people see the trash and know what to do when they see the trash without you involved. And that's a huge step. That's a different mindset for a leader.
Hey there, it's Tyler. Quick little interruption. Thanks for listening to this episode. I want to let you know that my book, The Things We Hide, is available now wherever you buy books. You can go to Amazon, Walmart, Barnes & Noble, wherever it may be, or you can go to the website, thethingswehidebook.com, and buy it there as well. Thanks for listening. Now let's back to the episode. Here's where, and this gets into some of the stuff that I've written about my book, but man, I think it's important because I want to get your perspective on it. I think as we see this movement, right? You're a doer, great. Doer, awesome. You're picking up the trash. Man, you're so good at picking up the trash. Why don't you become a team leader and you can help other people pick up the trash? And then all of a sudden you're just like, well, how do I, again, that crux of delegation. And then all of a sudden one day you're like, well, I can't be here for all the shifts. I have to tell the other person to pick up the trash when I'm not here. That delegation, right? This is my theory, is the barrier in between doing and delegating is the same barrier between delegating and developing. And that is the fear and insecurity of how am I going to be identified and viewed? Where is my value? If I'm valued and I'm applauded for being a doer, man, I'm doing because I'm getting validation. I'm getting kudos. I'm getting the gold stars. But then all of a sudden I can't do enough anymore and I fall into it a bad way and I delegate. Well, I didn't learn to go from doer to delegator. I fell into it. And I believe it's the same thing that holds people back from moving up the 5 levels of leadership. And in this case, and that's what we're really describing without describing it, is the insecurity and the fear of, man, where is my value? How am I, my own security and my value? And I think that is just, it's a barrier. It's like, man, if I can learn to develop, man, you don't need me anymore. Oh, now they don't need me. I'm going to get replaced. That's how people think, but they don't realize if you don't need me anymore, there's much bigger problems for you to solve because now all of a sudden you're a leader that we can put anywhere.
Right. Yeah, I think that could be the case for a lot of people. I'm sure there's fear and insecurity because to your point, what gets recognized and rewarded gets repeated. And so if you get recognized and rewarded for picking up trash, you'll probably keep picking up trash. If you get recognized and rewarded for developing people, you're going to probably develop more people.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people, even when they get to developer, they miss the fact there may be one more step for you, and that's when you become a designer. and you're actually creating systems that develop people so that the whole thing can work.
Yeah.
Now, when I talk about this with leaders, I'm quick to point out these are not stages that you find yourself in once and then you move on, never to return. The world's just, it's just too dynamic. I mean, there are times you and I as leaders will need to be doers. There are times we'll need to be delegators. There are times we'll need to be developers. And there are other times we'll need to be a designer. The question I ask leaders is, where are you spending most of your time? And it really should be in the developer designer, not the doer and the delegator. So I think there are all kind of things at play that keep people from advancing in their maturity, not just their maturity, but as they think about leadership, their leadership maturity.
So let's take a step back. Let's get on the same page as far as, as you designed and described the fundamentals. Let's, level set there, and then we can continue moving on.
Yeah, I'll just hit them quick, and then we can talk about whatever you want to talk about.
Yeah.
So I mentioned I put together a team of really smart people. Some people appreciate this story. We didn't know what we were doing because the process, I'll put that in air quotes, the process that we had used quite successfully. And by the way, this is the process that many small organizations use. And we called it immersion and osmosis. And that's the way I learned a lot of leadership, because I was the 16th employee at Chick-fil-A. And I got to sit around the table every day at lunch with our senior leaders. There were only 16 people. And I'm sitting there with Truett Cathy and Jimmy Collins, the executive vice president, and the chief financial officer and the chief marketing officer. And, observe a lot by looking, as Yogi Berra says, right?
Yeah.
And so in small organizations, that's how you do it. But as I mentioned, we were at a point that the scope and scale of the organization had outgrown that process. And so put together this team. We didn't know what we were doing, but we said we need to learn from others. And so we did global benchmarking. We read a couple hundred books on leadership. We did lots of interviews with people who knew a lot more about this topic than we did. And I'll never forget the day we were in a meeting trying to process all this. And somebody on the team asked what appeared to be a straightforward question. They said, well, what is it that leaders do? Because we had already decided that we didn't want anything academic or theoretical or conceptual. We wanted a behaviorally based definition. So somebody said, what is it that leaders do? Well, I don't know if you've ever pondered that. I would suggest that you not, unless you've got a lot of time on your hands, because we covered the wall. We wallpapered the entire conference room with flip chart paper. I think we came up with 1,234 things that leaders do, which validated that obviously this is real work, but it was also very deflating, because we were thinking, okay, can we go to the executive committee and say, we've now identified the 1,234 things that leaders do, and we're beginning to create the curriculum, right? I mean, it was just so overwhelming. And a lot of leaders listening can say, yeah, it can be overwhelming. We do a lot.
Yeah.
And then somebody said, is there a short list? We said, is there a short list? They said, yeah. Is there a short list of things that great leaders have always done, and we believe they will always do in the future? And the exercise that followed resulted in 5 fundamentals. So I'll hit them really quick. First is they see the future. Leadership always begins with a picture of the future. And again, there's a lot we could say about that, but a lot of the things you'll read in the world, the term vision is going to be used. We use that language as well. But what are you trying to achieve? What are you trying to become? What are you trying to accomplish? Why does it matter? If you're not pursuing something, I would suggest you're not leading. Now, you may be doing any number of things, and we could put labels on them, but leadership is about moving people and teams and organizations from where you are to where you want to be, which demands that you know where you want to be.
Mm-hmm.
First fundamental, see the future. Now, I'll quickly say this. This is not intended to be a process diagram. It's not step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, because I think your listeners will understand after I get through these, you're probably should be always working on these fundamentals, but see the future is first among equals. Because if you're not trying to accomplish something, if you're not trying to achieve something, if you don't have a preferred picture of the future, then you don't need the other 4 anyway.
I would contend you're just on a hamster wheel.
Sure. And trying to convince people that it's fun, they should come with you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. The second fundamental is to engage and develop others. And we talk about engagement has 2 parts, 2 phases. One is, who do you select? Who to recruit? Who do you select? Who do you ask to join your team? Because we think that matters a lot. And then the second part of engagement is when you create the context and the environment so people will willingly invest themselves fully. We've done some subsequent work on engagement. And again, we found a lot of work that was very academic, very conceptual, very theoretical. It has its roots in psychology. So a lot of even in the business lit, it's kind of gone down that path. We simplified it. And I used to tell people we simplified this because we sell chicken. And this just needs to be really straightforward. And we said engagement is really about how much someone cares. How much they care about their work, how much they care about their coworkers, how much they care about their customer, and how much they care about their organization. And we believe that how much someone cares is the full responsibility of a leader. The things that leaders do or fail to do have a direct impact on how much somebody cares. So, see the future, engage, develop others. The third fundamental is to reinvent continuously. The best leaders understand that progress is always preceded by change. Change has gotten a bad rap, I think, in some leadership circles. And I would suggest those men and women don't actually understand their role.
Yeah.
If you're going to help people, teams, and organizations move from where you are to where you want to be, change is the price of admission, right? Hope is not a strategy. And so we said we want to teach leaders how to reinvent predominantly in 3 domains: reinvent yourself, reinvent systems and work processes, and reinvent structure. And there are probably other domains, but that'll give you some good hooks, because when you talk about reinventing continuously, the concept is so big. 25 years ago, we got immediate feedback. Help me break that down. And so those are the 3 domains that we talk about most often. So see the future, engage, develop others, reinvent continuously. And number 4 is to value results and relationships. We referenced that just a few minutes ago. There's tension there, but there's power in the tension. And it's the way to maximize performance and long-term results, is when you care deeply and passionately about both people and performance. So, yeah. Kind of countercultural in some places, but it's the answer.
Just to sit on that, I think it's countercultural when it comes back to what I mentioned earlier, when you're more afraid of being liked and you're seeking validation in a only relationship, as opposed to why do you start from the beginning? We see the future, we see something different. It comes back to that hamster wheel. It's like, hey, if we're just churning this wheel and we're happy to churn this wheel and everything's great, well, that's awesome. But how far did that wheel move? What did we accomplish by it? And I think it comes back to, if you don't have the results piece of it, I think it's really hard to gauge, am I fulfilling a purpose?
Yeah, we have said, I agree with all of that. We have said forever that one of the things we're trying to help leaders do is to make a clear distinction in your head and your heart that activity does not equate to accomplishment.
Yeah.
I mean, we can get really busy doing all kind of stuff. My team probably over 4 decades, they may have heard me say hundreds of thousands of times, you get no credit for doing the wrong things well. Because I had superstar people, anything they laid their hand to was going to be done at a world-class level. So I spent a whole lot of my career trying to be sure we were working on the right stuff.
Yeah.
I was so privileged. I didn't have to say, you got to improve the quality. I didn't have to say that much at all. When I'm saying, no, are we working on the right things?
The things that actually impact going back to the results in relationships. Both.
Absolutely. And so, 5th and finally, the 5th fundamental in the updated version is embody a leader's heart. Embody a leader's heart. And we took the heart habits that we had identified in the book, The Heart of Leadership, to give that some definition and some meaning. I'll just share one or two.
Yeah.
One of the heart habits is the best leaders hunger for wisdom. Leaders are learners. Now, I have heard very thoughtful people that I know and love and respect say leaders are readers. And I have to say, not necessarily, but they're all learners. Because I know some great leaders who hunger for wisdom, and they learn through relationships and mentors and coaching and formal education and podcasts. They're not necessarily readers. Some leaders are readers, but they're all learners, because I think that demonstrates humility, vulnerability, an openness. And by the way, I think it's really impossible for a leader to challenge people to grow if they're not growing. I just don't think you have the moral authority. And so if you want growing people, you better be hungering for wisdom.
I think there's 3 facets of growth. It's actually a book that I'll write some days. Grow for yourself, grow for others, grow with others. To me, that's growth. Like it's kind of, you need all 3. It's like, what are you doing to grow in each of those capacities? I believe that's a facet of leadership development.
I want to read that book when you finish it.
All right.
That's
we'll
good.
Get it to you.
So, let me just give you one more, because I want to go where you want to go here. Because again, we think there are 5 core heart habits, but I'll share with you, my publisher for that original book asked me which of the 5 was most important. And I said, well, they're all important. And he said, yeah, but people really don't finish books very much anymore. He said, you better put the most important heart habit first. So interesting. I had to rewrite the manuscript because the manuscript was finished. And I said, well, if you assume they're not going to finish it, I do have to resequence these. And I want to share which in the current book, it's listed as the 5th of the heart habits, but it's probably the most critical. And that is the ability to think others first, which for most humans is not our go-to. It's not our default. And there are probably any number of reasons that are beyond the scope of this call today. But the good news is I believe that any leader who wants to can cultivate the ability to think others first. And when you do that, you're well on your way to becoming a leader people want to follow, because that's what we say, these embody a leader's heart. That's what it's really about. You can say that the first 4 are more about the skill piece.
Mm-hmm.
But if your heart's not right, nobody cares about your skills.
I think that comes back to the results and relationship. And one of the core principles that I believe to effectively lead people, to influence people, you have to connect with them. And I believe a tool for connection is empathy. I define that as put your arms around someone and walk with them. And I think you can't empathize with a person. Again, put your arms around them and walk with them if you're not thinking about them. And if you're not thinking about them, you're just dragging them. You're coming back to, you are just doer and delegator. You're not developer and designer. And to continue to, to facilitate those actions, you have to think about people, which is being empathetic, to say, what do they want to accomplish in this? Not about me. What is it for them? Which, I come back to the work that you've done. As you mentioned earlier, it's like, hey, I need to think about the right things we need to do. I don't have to worry about the quality. I mean, that's baked into what we do as an organization, as business. But what's the right thing to do to get the results and the relationships? Because if we only get the results, we know what companies are like. They do that all day long, and we can see their success rate. But if we do the results and the relationships, and people want to come back here, and or the people that are here want to go do other things that develop leadership, I don't think you can lead, period, without having an empathetic ability, and or that is think of others. And I think the biggest problem is people don't think. They don't think. We've created a world where it's do and not think.
Yeah. I think it's funny you say that, because I was on a podcast recently, and I'm glad you didn't start this way, or we wouldn't have talked about the book today. Because the host said, what's the biggest problem you believe facing leaders globally at this moment in history? And I said, busyness, complexity, distraction, fear, fatigue, and maybe even a little success, or some combination. And I said, we call that quicksand.
Mm-hmm.
No leader can lead well from quicksand. Oh, and by the way, can't help others out if you're in it, which then by extension means the leaders around you are in it. And leaders in quicksand aren't working on culture. They're not working on engagement. They're not working on execution. They're not working on anything beyond survival.
Yes.
And so we've spent a lot of time and energy saying we got to help leaders get out because they're not thinking. The reason I went down that whole path, we wrote a book called Smart Leadership, but there's a chapter in that book called Stop and Think. I mean, so many leaders, I say, when have you got time on your calendar designated to think, to reflect, to assess, and to create? And the numbers of leaders that say they don't have any dedicated time to think is scary. It's mind boggling. So my question for them is, well, who's doing that if you're not? Which means you literally might have a whole organization where nobody's thinking.
And I think that, well, but it comes back to the problems that you've identified. We discussed is where if we're not developing leaders, then we didn't have the thought beforehand that we need to. It's just like, well, whenever we get there, we'll figure it out, right? And it's that the ability the person that has been the teacher to my student, John Maxwell, and just this idea of like, hey, if you're not thinking, you got a problem. And, spend more time thinking. And yet so many leaders, they're too busy doing because they've been rewarded for doing, or as our crunch and our financial culture has made it, do more with less, do more with less, do more with less. And they're left constantly to the places we don't have the resources or the time to develop people because it actually required them to think. We just want them to do because in the short term, that'll get us to the next quarter.
Well, sure. So I just got two thoughts because, again, we could spend a lot of time on this topic. I understand that. And there have been times in my life and career when I've been in quicksand. I mean, so I know what it's like. I'm not speaking as a guy who's not been there. Yeah. But let me say a couple of things that I believe can help. One is to take a really, really, really hard look, an honest look at your calendar. Now, I'm not suggesting this is a statistic that will hold true today, but some of your audience has heard the name Peter Drucker. I would suggest that Drucker was the best management and leadership thinker of the last 2,000 years. Drucker said he had never met a knowledge worker, his language, I would say leader, who couldn't eliminate 35% of what was on their calendar with no ill effect. I'm not saying that's your number, but what if it was 2 hours a week, 4 hours a week that you could eliminate with no ill effect? Well, guess what? You could use that time to think.
Well, and I think is going back to our, you know how you get there? You delegate, you develop, you design. Stop doing, right? And
but in the short term, I mean, I hear that and I'm with you, but in the short term for leaders that are already working 50, 60 hours a week and going, I have no time, try to find 1 hour. I mean, you ultimately need to do those things that we've been talking about.
Yeah.
Next week. And if you can't find it next week, find it the next week. Schedule 1 hour with yourself and put it on your calendar, meeting with me. And then when somebody asks for that time, you can say with full integrity, no, I'm sorry, I've got a meeting. And here's what I believe. Over time, leaders will discover they add their greatest value when they're alone.
I got into this conversation yesterday morning. I think and again, the person that I've been a student to, I think there's just as much value. I think that hour, I mean, if you're not doing that in your day somehow, where it is, I'm reading to grow, I'm spending that time to think, I'm process, I'm like doing something to write, whatever that space is. I do it at 5 o'clock in the morning. That's when I do it. It's part of my daily routine. It's been, I also have recognized and seen that spending time with others that we're thinking together is the greatest multiplier that I can do in my week. And part of the community that I lead, but I've seen the value in it. And I've learned this from John Maxwell. It is layered learning. You and I have spent an hour here by the time we're done, and you and I will have both seen a different perspective and have learned more than if I was just sitting down here and I was looking at the book, reading a book. It's like the more things came about it, and I've kind of gathered, even this thought of like thinking coming from you is like, okay. And the ability to do that well and structured it well. And you think you need both. You need the clear space, but you need, how am I around others that make me think in ways that I can't?
Yeah, I think it is both. And there's a stat to support that. I need to go see what the current numbers are. The last number I saw is that teams outperform individuals 96% of the time. And my theory on that is because we're smarter together.
Yes.
Not only just our collective IQ, but our collective experience and our diverse personalities. And if you're a person of faith, you'd say our different giftedness. All these things make us stronger together. So absolutely. I would say both. But for a lot of the leaders who are in quicksand, it's a step or two away to get people in a room together.
Yeah.
Because everybody else is in quicksand too. I ask a lot of people when their teams meet and they go, never. It's like, oh, then you don't have a team. Well, we have all these. Yeah, we have a team, but you never meet. And so, well, we could debate whether you really have a team.
Or meet to meet and not meet to think.
Exactly. Or
there's a big difference there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A staff meeting is not necessarily a team meeting. Yeah.
There's one last question here, Mark, and hopefully keep this condensed because I think it could go for a little bit. But as Ken, your co-author, Ken Blanchard, is such the mentor as a generation older, and as I think about our age difference and closely that way, how much do you see the opportunity and I recognize this to a mentor of mine, John Maxwell, and kind of this idea of how much of the opportunity I have to carry the baton. And as you've worked through a lot of this stuff, if you've taken from Ken, how much do you see the opportunity for another generation right now to be the mentors and be those baton bearers for the stuff that you're sharing in your book, in all your books, whether it's The Secret or the others? Where do you see that great opportunity right now?
Well, I think, what a question. I think you could go back throughout history and say there was a leadership challenge at any point in history. There have been leadership challenges as long as there is recorded time in history.
Yeah.
When I look at the data about the state of global leadership, it might be as bad as it has ever been. So, to your question, I think that speaks to tremendous opportunity. It's like when senior leaders say, we don't have enough leaders, and then they'll say, and we're not going to solve it. Man, I would love to have men and women on my team going, no, we can solve that. We're going to have to be thoughtful, strategic, planful. We can solve that. Because I could solve it. You could solve it. Yeah. John Maxwell could solve it. So all these leaders, I'm not even sure what to think about all these leaders that just say, we're not going to solve this leadership shortage. It's like, well, because you've chosen not to. You've chosen not to. So I think now is the time for the next generation to take the baton. Now, my tiny part of it is I'm trying to figure out how to serve 100 million leaders in the next 7 years. And that'll be my part.
Just small endeavor.
That's what I'm going to try to figure out. And then hopefully somebody in that bunch will take the baton and they'll try to serve the next 100 million, the next 100 million. But now there's never been a better time because the need has never been greater.
And, I think ultimately the great crux of it is how to help people understand the solution is not more doing. It's bigger. That's what I continually to understand. And I hear from this conversation again is we got to stop forcing people just to do. And there's a much more to it. Mark, thank you so much. Where can people learn about The Secret? Where can they learn about Lead Every Day, all the things you're doing?
All right. So let's start by sharing my cell number. So for anybody that would like to connect, my number is 678-612-8441. If you'd please put that in the show notes for those that are driving, that they can have access to that, 78612-8441. And then leadeveryday.com. I mean, we're trying to serve leaders, and we do keynotes and workshops and coaching and resources and a digital academy and all the stuff you would expect. Yeah, we just want to serve leaders.
Mark, thank you so much. Thank you for everyone watching on YouTube. If you could hit this subscribe button as well as the bell to get notified whenever we drop new content, that would be spectacular as well. If you're listening, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, if you could rate and review this episode, share it with someone who you think it would add value to, that would be phenomenal. And it would also help more impactful leaders find people like Mark. Until next time, choose to lead with impact.